Hello, welcome to Devtoberfest 2022's final Fun Friday event. Today, the developer advocates here at SAP are having a roundtable discussion on some of our favorite moments as developers. Sit back, relax, and enjoy as we thoroughly embarrass ourselves for your entertainment.
The goal here is just to tell stories of times that we did really dumb things in development. So like you forgot to save a file and were wondering why your code wasn't working, even though you knew you were making changes, but it wasn't showing up in your build. Or you misnamed a variable and spent an inordinate amount of time trying to figure out why like your function wasn't being called correctly, or things weren't happening, or you didn't access something. And it's just like the silly mistakes that when you figure it out, you're just like, why? How? I know I'm smarter than that. There's no morals to these stories, so it's not like, and in the future, I learned not to do this, or it made me a better developer, because we're going to make these exact same mistakes in the future, because they're just silly and dumb, and we're humans and not perfect. So, with all of that said, does anyone have a story that they would like to start with that follows along these lines?
Well, actually, along those lines, I have a story. Well, it's more of a pattern of me being dumb. And it's about changing something, and I'm actually changing something else, and I'm seeing no results. So, and this happens all the time to me. So, in fact, just the other day, I built a container, right? A Docker container, and I was running the container, and I couldn't figure out why the container architecture. I'm using my Intel-based MacBook Pro, right? I couldn't figure out why the container architecture was like. I couldn't get this program to run. And I was looking at the details, and I wrote down, kernel level, with LSB release, and you name it. I say it's like this is an ARM-based processor, and then you get to the stage where you're so desperate, you're doubting everything. It's like, hold on, have I been running a different chip in my laptop the whole time? And I spent 20 minutes trying to figure out why I couldn't get this sort of AMD Intel architecture thing to work, x86. And it's because the context of my Docker client was pointing to a different host. So I was actually not physically on my Raspberry Pi, not on my MacBook Pro. And it took me 20 minutes to figure that out. And it's a similar sort of thing. So when I'm debugging something, more often than not, or more often than I want, I'll be changing a file and refreshing and not seeing that change. So I'll change something else. I'll change it by pressing the keys harder, not putting any print statements in or anything, which I should do, and things are not happening, right? And it's because I'm changing the wrong file. I'm changing the wrong file, and I'm refreshing a server that's not picking up that file. And this is just a pattern with me. So there's the first of many potential, but that is definitely a thing with me, just completely missing what I'm doing.
I've done that a few times. I've definitely edited a file that was like a temporary file that I had copied over and was like, why are things not updating? Yeah. Thomas, I know you've got a good one. You are on mute.
One of Tom's biggest problems is his microphone.
Yeah, obviously today. Actually, can you let me share my screen? I've recreated the scene of the crime here to demonstrate.
Uh-oh. It's not yet Halloween. Is this allowed?
No. So my story starts at the beginning of my career many years ago. I was actually in... I don't think it was actually called BC 400 at the time. That's how long ago this was. For those of you that know, it was the introductory ABAP class. So I was fresh out of university. I'd been working at an SAP customer for all of maybe I don't know, at this point, maybe 4 weeks, 5 weeks, and they sent me off to the first ABOP class. And this is just a recreation of pretty much the first program we wrote in the class, which was supposed to be, select from a table and then loop over the data and make some change to some data and put it back in the internal table. Anybody by chance see what's wrong with this code? Because I didn't at the time, but
you got yourself an endless loop there.
Exactly. So this little beauty, when you execute it, just kicks off and runs and runs and runs. Now, on a modern system, what should happen here in a couple of seconds is I'll exhaust all the memory on the application server that can possibly be allocated to this. So even here on a modern system, this isn't a really great thing to do because I did put, how many millions of rows there? 47.5 million rows in that table. Used up all the application server memory, and then finally it cleaned up. But I was doing this on 3.0A of R3. So in those days, there weren't protections against the overallocation of memory. So this thing just ran until it shut down the whole application server. And as it turns out, this was the training center in Chicago. And awesome. All the classes going on at this time were all sharing the same R3 system. So I shut down not only my classroom, the introduction to ABOP class, but every other class that was going on at that time. Now, I couldn't figure out what was wrong, being totally new to the language. I thought this was perfectly fine. The instructor even came over and looked at the code and executed it a couple times and crashed everybody's the entire system. But then he eventually noticed, oh, you did append instead of modify. That's what's wrong here. So that's my embarrassing story, how I shut down the entire Chicago training center for several hours at the beginning of my career.
That's impressive.
That is impressive.
Yeah.
That's like a resume level thing. Like, I am good at this.
I was good at shutting down systems, that's for sure.
My fun story is also actually from college. So my dad has been in the computer science field since, and we like to joke, since he could write on tablets and codes were punch cards. And when I went into computer science, he would often help me with my classes if I ran into issues, because I was doing online and it was so much easier to just ask my dad rather than email the professor. So I think I was doing something in like C or C++, and it was on a server, and there was no like real IDE to help me with anything. And it was maybe a 20-line program. It was essentially declare a function and call a function over here, and I believe it should have printed something out, and the function was really easy, maybe like add a number to another number, something like that, just to kind of get a feel for how the code is working and what stuff should do. So I was sitting there and I was like, this is a 20-line code and it's not working, and I don't know why. My function's not being called or the print statement's not working, and I have no idea what I'm doing. I called my dad over and I was like, what's going on? I've been doing this for like an hour and nothing is working. There's 20 lines here. There's no reason this shouldn't work. And he and I troubleshooted for probably another hour, and we were like renaming the function and the call and like doing like test print statements and things like that. And it wasn't until quite a while later that I realized, after I had even renamed everything, that I had a small little like 1-character error in the function call. I had named the function something and I was calling it something very slightly different. And the funniest part of this is I was at one point during this troubleshooting with my dad, I was like, you know what, I'm just going to retype this. And so I retyped the function name and I retyped the call, and I freaking kept the error. And I was like, I don't even know how I managed to do that. And my dad was sitting there with like a decade or probably decades, I don't know, he's not that old, of experience. And he didn't even catch it. So a newbie and very experienced developer both just watched me make this error multiple times. We both just kind of like sighed and took a break for several hours after that. We were like, we can't.
This is one of the reasons why I'm always in favor of short variable names. The classic, SAP 5-character abbreviations for German words and German phrases names. They're the best because I have similar sort of things. So you have these really long, helpful, camel case maybe, or kebab case variable names, and invariably you get them wrong because there's so much choice and so many possibilities of getting it wrong. Whereas if you have a really short variable name, first of all, it fits in your brain. You don't have to think about it, and then you're not going to make a mistake. There we go.
Yeah.
There's my.
And we can extend that into Hungarian notation as well.
Oh no!
Now that was the biggest mistake ever, wasn't it? One of the world famous bugs.
But it's funny how.
Come on.
Oh, I'm not even going to start.
That would dominate the whole time, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, we have done a whole live stream on Hungarian notation, haven't we?
We have indeed. Yeah. I reckon we got some good stories from Nico and Josh as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I got one. It's not. I will share my screen too. Can you guys see something?
Yes, it's horrible.
Okay, cool. Horrible.
No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. So one thing that happened to me more often than it should is, I have a list of. So this is a UI5 XML view here, and I have a list of users, right? I have a model that's called users, and then there's an array in there with users. So I have that list, and I use the aggregation binding syntax here to bind that users model to the list to display a list of users. But with the standard list item, which is the actual item of the list, I more often than I should forget to again reference the model. So I'm like, okay, we have the user model, display the users, and then display the nickname of those users. But what you will get is an empty list of all the users. Like you see there's, you have a list with like, I don't know, 20, 25, whatever entries, but it's empty. And I'm like, why is that? Yeah. And you always have to like, again, reference the name of the model here. It's a tiny thing, but it happened to me at least like 4 to 5 times already. And it always takes me 15 minutes to figure it out. So,
guilty. I've done that too.
Yeah, that happened to me as well.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm not the only one.
I think we have an excuse here. I think we've got an excuse, right? My theory, trying to make myself feel better when I do this, is that because the aggregation binding, the list items equals, is like the parent, and it's also absolute rather than relative. You got the forward slash as part of the path, right? And then you've got within the actual inside the list, you've got nickname, which is relative from a path perspective to you. You also think, it's relative to there. Therefore, in that relative relationship, obviously there's a model in that as well, but there's not.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
but
this will be.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say this. It's easy to fall into this because if this was using something like XPath, then going back to what DJ was saying, you would have, for example, just calling nickname will work. So, for example, if you have some form of a transformation background using XML, this is XML, right? So you would expect something like an XPath working there. And if this was XPath, that nickname will work. So you don't need to refer to the parent object.
But in its defense, you don't have to use children of the iteration. You could use anything else from any other model, from any root attribute that isn't in that particular model that you're iterating over. And sometimes you do need that. You've got some flag, like you're setting a control flag to say whether it renders, red, green, the stoplights, or something like that, or criticality, conditionality, things like that. And sometimes you're not referring to the iteration. And then how would you differentiate that?
Oh yeah, no, it's not. It wasn't a criticism of the mechanism. It was more that the lack of the slash puts my small brain in relative mode.
Yeah. And also, I think if you learn UF5, you more often use the default model. So if the users was the default model, that would work. And so to my eye, it doesn't look wrong, right? Because there is a scenario where that works, where nickname with the no model name works. So maybe
we should have no default model.
Maybe we should have no default
Have to be
model.
explicit everywhere.
Yeah. I mean, they do recommend being explicit, which is why super long variable names exist.
I'll give you one that's a little different. It's about, I think, how you phrased this in the beginning, Michelle, which is, how did I miss that? And feeling like you have egg on your face and having to own up to the embarrassment. I was in charge of a project to change, some people on the call may not remember calling cards, but for a large company that shall remain unnamed, I was in charge of changing from one telecom carrier to another one. And in charge of those contracts, we had to build a program to see which would be better to use this carrier versus this carrier. So as you're traveling to other countries, going to Europe, going to Latin America, you look up a calling card number in this little thing you carry in your wallet, and you put in a code for each country you're trying to call. And we were talking about thousands of dollars that employees were spending traveling per month that started to really add up. So I built a small thing in Excel with some SQL programming and figured out if we're using this card at, I'm just going to use round numbers, 5 cents a minute versus this one at 4.6 cents a minute, then we're going to save. And then we had to combine in cell phone usage because some people carried cell phones and maybe it would be cheaper for them. So all this math was done, and I wrote this program up and I gave it to the chief information officer, and I said, you're in charge of telecom, and here's my recommendation. We switch from carrier A to carrier B, and we tell all the employees that we're going to save this much money. And so it goes up to the CFO, and the CFO reads this document and says, so we're going to save $20,000 per month by making the switch to this vendor. And that was my recommendation based on this program I had written. And I didn't round to the right decimal. So when you took the decimal out on the cell phones and the calling cards to like 4 decimal points, because that's what the carrier was billing us at, instead of at 4.5, it was 4.5263 or something. When you used all of those rounded decimals in the SQL script, it almost came out to zero savings. So we had published it, we had sent it out. People were getting cards in the mail to start using, and then the CFO asked me why we weren't saving money, and I had to go back and find the mistake. That's how far it got, and nobody checked my work in accounting apparently. And so I went in, and it was one of those where it was like talking to my dad. It was, I'm not angry at you, I'm just disappointed.
Disappointed.
So you made the office
said that
the office space mistake.
Exactly, very much so. Yeah, it was Superman 3. Yeah, when the CIO said he was disappointed, I just was like, yeah.
Oh no. That's
so yeah, that's me.
I have a story to share. So this will be quick. I once truncated a production database table that contained sensitive data and lots of very important data that's used by people to do transactions, right? So this was a very important table, and then back then we received some files from a vendor, and we needed to process that data. And normally I would grab the data, do the processing in the development environment just to make sure that that everything was going fine, because we recently introduced something. And then I realized, well, after the fact of truncating the table, I realized that I was actually hitting the production database. Obviously, that's a big, massive problem, right? So basically, at that point, no one was able to do any transactions with their credit cards in this place. So obviously, a big, massive problem. But fortunately, there were good backups, so it was possible to restore that database table from a backup Yeah, those were some very long 30 minutes, I would say. Once I figured out the error, right, that I was actually hitting the production database. So obviously, back then, like we were just like moving fast, breaking things. Still, when you're moving fast, you need to be very careful with what you're doing. So I guess it does happen when you like really do something that you shouldn't be doing. When you're in production instead of doing something in development, and yeah, it just happened. Fortunately, a backup saved me that time. I guess that's the importance of backups, right? So it's important.
Yeah, goodness. Thank God for backups.
Yeah.
They probably saved a lot of errors like that. Yeah. Rich, Mimiki, y'all got anything? You want to share and embarrass yourself on the internet for fun?
I don't know. I couldn't really think of anything worth sharing. I know that I've had several moments over my 20 plus years of, and my wife can attest to this. I'd be like real deep into some code, and then I'd have that moment, that moment where you're like, are you kidding me? Are you serious? Right. And they were so small and insignificant. I don't even remember what they were, but I know the feeling. It wasn't happiness that I found the problem. It was anger, right?
Yeah.
So it was more like, wow, I can't believe that I sat here for this many hours looking at this, and it comes down to something so simple and so stupid, right?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
But I mean, like I said, I know that's happened so many times. I just don't know what the particulars of those instances were. But I can tell you that one time, and I have no idea what happened, but I was in the computer room I used to work for an SAP customer. I was in the computer room. And this is back when everything was on premise, right? So we had these big boxes sitting around. We were running AS400s. And for whatever reason, I'm at the AS400 production system, and I'm doing something on it. I'm punching, and if you know what an AS400 looks like, basically it's a big black box, and it's got a small little door, and it opens up, and it's got a couple buttons in there with a screen about this big, and a big white button next to those little small buttons. And those small little buttons actually do something on that small little screen, right? And whatever I was doing, I got punchy and I hit that big white button, and that big white button turned the system off. So this is our production system.
So big.
The production system comes crashing down, and how I know this is that all of a sudden half the IT department walks in the door behind me. And yeah, so that was pretty embarrassing. To this day, I really don't remember what I was doing. I know I was doing something, but I don't know why I was doing it, because it wasn't my job to do. But apparently something needed done, and I went in there to do it, and I got punchy, and the whole production system went down. I mean, it came back up a couple minutes later, but still, it was a little embarrassing. But
that's why computer room operators don't like to let programmers into the computer room.
Well, that's the thing, is that, and here's, I started my career as the computer operator. Those were my machines at some point in time, so I felt that I had some sort of right to be in there punching on these things like I used to. But I shouldn't have been doing that, because at the time I was strictly just a programmer. But yeah, that good times. Yeah.
I have one that is infrastructure related. Then, if we're going to go a little bit off of the coding to touching the buttons you shouldn't touch, I did not do this, but I was in the room and was asked if it was okay, and I said I think so. And we had just built a data center. And this entire data center had things as big as AS400s in it, and it had a lot of racks of NT machines at the time of running Windows NT. All of our email is running on that. And if you know how data centers work with uninterrupted power systems, they flow through batteries that then go out to a generator that kicks in. And it was a new data center setup that we wanted to test. And my manager said, this is the submarine switch, the thing you can flip on the UPS that cuts us to the generator power. street power's on right now, but generator's running. We're testing it. And I said, yeah, that's what it should do. And he goes, so if I flip it, we shouldn't lose any power. I said, that's what it should do, I think. He flips it in the middle of the day at like 10:30 in the morning. And you could audibly hear everything go.
Oh.
And as it shut down, all the lights went out. Everything goes off and every alarm is beeping. And then we're trying to figure out how to get power back on. One of the battery leads, because the batteries are wired in serial, one of it wasn't tight. And so the UPS system wasn't able to supply power. Everything went out. So we spent, I'm not joking, over 14 hours restoring Windows NT backups for every email. So NT took forever to come up. And then we had to get everything running at the time. I can't even remember what Microsoft's, I'm blanking out on it, but it was before Active Directory. So we had to rematrix everybody's setup and get their email backups back into their account. That was a long 2 days, a very long weekend.
Ouch.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you ran the test. It failed.
That was a good test to run.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if yours is like a car battery, that little nut that goes onto the stem that you tighten, make sure they're all tight.
Aren't you supposed to run that test before you cut over production to the data center, though?
Yeah. Yeah.
Again, I was just the audible, I think so. I wasn't in charge of it. Not an electrician. That's a thing I need. I need a sticker on my laptop. Not an electrician.
Not an electrician. Yeah. Or a computer operator. Yeah.
Or a lawyer.
Or a lawyer. So, Miki, you got anything?
You're on mute, Miki.
Well, there it is.
We're good, yeah.
Well, mine, I guess it will be early on within the team. So it was just like basically, I think it was the first week of me like slowly coding in ABAP. And I don't know. I had this issue where I got everything to run and everything was okay, but I kept getting this error. And it goes back to what everyone's saying is like that minor mistake that you get. So I'm used to like, JavaScript, all that. So I'm used to like kind of getting everything. So I'm looking at my code, I'm trying to see what the mistake was. And I'm looking like, because I see everything is right, like because usually it's grammatic error that kind of gets me. So sometimes I miss like a letter or add an extra letter or whatever. So I'm looking at the code, and then I see, well, now I know. So I see that, okay, I'm missing periods on all of these end statements. So I'm just missing periods. So I'm like, this was what was making this, like, I thought I was like, okay, I'm just not getting it. Like, I'm a total idiot. I'm not getting it. Like, it's not working. And then I had to do some research and come to find out, okay, I just needed to add those periods. And when it ran, I was just, okay, that's enough work for today. No, I'm done. And then also like activating like the actual thing and running it. Like that was also another thing that I was like, I always forgot to do. So yeah, those were the two that now I know. It's almost like kind of like a 3-step thing where I'm like, okay, did you add the period? Okay, did you do this? Did you do that? And then if it doesn't run, then it's like, okay, maybe it's you now. It's not it's the code. So yeah, just minor mistakes is what gets you really frustrated when you're coding, honestly.
Mm-hmm. I've been there. I once spent about 2 hours messing with some CSS and trying to figure out why it wasn't on the showing up at the front end. And I believe this was the time that I didn't save the file for like 2 hours. And I've never done that before. And I've never done that since. And I was like, why is this not working? But ever since then, now I like, if something's not working, I flick up and I'm like, did I save it?
Yeah.
And then I just
exactly
like quadruple save the file just to be sure. I know there was another time that I was doing some stuff in the front end and like you run your application and then it pops up a web page. But when you stop your application, that web page doesn't necessarily break. And And I know there's been a few times when I've been doing some coding and I've been saving the files, and then I go to my webpage and I'm like, why isn't this here? Until I refresh the page, and then everything breaks. And I'm like, right, I actually have to run things to see code. So, yeah.
That thing that you said, Mimiki, about having the 3 steps and everything, that I've still not learned it. My career is decades and decades long, but I'm not always able to say, hold on a minute, I've been banging my head, I get this red mist or this tunnel vision. But then on the times when I do think, hold on a minute, this is not working because your brain's not working. So I'll go out and go for a sleep or go for a walk or, leave it overnight, come back the next morning, having spent like 2 or 3 hours trying to figure out something. And in 5 minutes, that's what it is. And for me, I find it so difficult to remember to, step away from the problem. I'm the problem, not the thing on the screen.
Maybe you need a post stamp too and put it right onto your computer, just so you remember.
You are the problem.
You are the problem.
Just get right to it.
Well, there's that. You mentioned variables again. See, variables are the cause of all problems, right? We should just use functional programming and no variables, just constants, right?
Well, you do need to name those things.
Yeah.
Which, in my experience, leads to issues.
See, this is not anything to do with how did I not see that, but I'm going to foist it upon you all anyway. I learned the other day a beautiful factoid about the variable I. We do a for loop, right? For I equals 1 to 10 or whatever. Why do people use I? Everybody uses I. Why is that?
Isn't it for index?
Well,
I thought it was for integer.
Oh, that too.
Well, I think, yeah, in a backwards type way, I index, makes sense. But J is also used, right? Especially if it's like within a subloop. And Rich was onto it because it comes from Fortran, where because again, when Fortran was created, space was at a premium. Randomly, which is of course why we had the Y2K bug, and also because all the machines are going to explode in 2038 because of a Unix epoch problem. But the reason why we have I in a for loop is because in Fortran, to save space, they had implicit typing of variables. So if it was I, J, K, L, M, or N, implicitly they were integers. So they've just picked the first one, the first integer, which was I, and used that in a loop. So there we go.
All right. I did know that J was because J. I didn't realize that it was just because I was the first one, and then Fortran was like, let's do the next 4. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. I just thought it was people were like, I need another integer or like a variable name here, and I'm going to be lazy and do the next one in the alphabet.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's some logic in that. I think it was to do with what letter the variable name began with. So obviously the shortest is a single letter, and it was I.
Yeah. Neat. Bringing in the fun facts.
Fun facts.
Anyone have any stories of the time that they missed something obvious or brought down servers? Because apparently it's the theme.
I'm sure he won't mind me calling him out here. A good old friend of mine back from when we were both working on SAP R2 on IBM mainframes, back in the day in London, in Victoria, in London, and we'd been running these back. Everything ran over back. The most important things ran in batch jobs. Of course, we had the real-time R2 system, but all the important stuff got run overnight. And these jobs could take minutes, hours, sometimes 12, 15 hours. And my good friend James Caston, cancelled a super important payment run job that had been running for over 12 hours. just before it finished, he cancelled it by mistake because he meant to cancel another one. And the payments were late and everything. It was super, and to this day, I still use the word to castanize when you stop something before it's finished. And that's James Caston, infamous and immortal.
All right. Well, I think we have exhausted all of the things we are willing to admit on YouTube. So thank you for embarrassing yourself on the internet for laughs. And I'm sure a lot of other developers who watch this are going to relate heavily. And if they can't, they haven't been a developer for very long, and they will eventually at some point because it's inevitable.
Yeah.
It's part of rite of passage to shut down a production server at some point in your career, right?
I haven't done that yet. I wasn't worried about it, but now I am. Yeah, thank you for coming and participating.
Thank you.
Cool.
All right. Thanks a lot,
Michelle.
Thank you for watching this year's final Fun Friday event. We hope you enjoyed or at least groaned along with us as we regaled you with times that we weren't as successful at our careers as we know we are capable of. If you could relate or you have stories of your own to share, we'd love to see them on Twitter, here on YouTube, or the Khoros event page. We hope you enjoyed all of Devtoberfest 2022, and as always, happy coding!